maybe we'll start. So there may be some people who wander in as we're talking. I'm Andrew Budd. I'm the Associate Dean of Sustainability and Urban Planning at RMIT, and I'm also a member of the Victorian Division Committee for the Planning Institute of Australia. I want to start by acknowledging that we're meeting on unceded Wurundjeri country, and I want us to acknowledge and consider the profound obligations and challenges that presents us in urban planning, including around the critical issue we're talking about today, which is the role of the planning system in addressing climate change and its implications. So today's session is the first one of three we're running that RMIT, La Trobe University in Bendigo and the Planning Institute of Australia are jointly hosting. The first one here is at RMIT, but the three are around the three key issues that the Planning Institute's, or the three key challenges, I suppose, the Planning Institute's presenting to candidates and parties at this year's state election that the Victorian Division's developed as key challenges. And Gabby McMillan, the President of the Planning Institute in Victoria, is here today and certainly be able to talk to you later about those broadly. But the three broad categories are around climate change, which we'll talk about today, around having a really clear role for planning and regional development, particularly as Victoria's population flows change, and also the third one around having a clear role for planning in social and affordable housing. And as we know, that particular challenge was one that was, I suppose, tarnished or blemished somewhat by this year's events, where we were unsuccessful in having a clear mechanism for planning to do a role like that. Today's event is about planning and climate change, and particularly what we consider might be the key issues of how planning can perform better in delivering climate-ready communities, climate-ready planning outcomes. The three key areas that the Planning Institute's interested in tasking any future government with is to address the broad issues of what the planning system should be doing to do a better job at performing a role in climate adaptation and mitigation in its broadest sense, recognising that the planning system as it stands, including the Planning and Environment Act, are not necessarily well joined up with climate change legislation and policy in Victoria at present. The second is the idea that we consider that there's a huge challenge, and we'll talk a bit about that today, a huge challenge in new precincts, both urban renewal and greenfields precincts in Victoria, moving towards climate resilience and net zero emissions. And the third being that we feel that from an adaptation perspective that the planning system needs to be better equipped, particularly around a dynamic and climate ready and reliable statewide flood management information system. So they're three asks that we've made. There's more details of those, and we'll hear more about those in coming months towards the election, but they're three key issues we think are critical right now for planning. You'll notice we haven't just talked about sort of general issues of reform and streamlining or anything else, but rather got to some really critical issues in this. So I wanted to introduce first the panel I have speaking tonight. We're doing this for our please come in. We're doing this for each of our three events, is having a panel and discussion around the topics, a chance for Q&A, but also a chance to get together and talk amongst ourselves as a community of practice around the issues that we can, I suppose, stimulate, and the debates we can stimulate coming up to the state election to put these on the agenda. So today we have Susie Maloney, who's the Director of the Centre for Just Places, which is part of Jesuit Social Services, in particular looking at climate adaptation justice issues. Dr. Travis Moore from RMIT University, whose research is particularly around built form and emissions, and you'll notice in your recent advertising for this that Kate Nason from Fletcher's Property was planning to be here and had a crisis today, and Travis has very thankfully stepped in to cover those same sorts of topics, particularly around emissions, built form, circular economy issues in the construction industry. And Jane Keddy from Hanson Partnerships, who's also a member of the Victorian State Committee and has done a range of projects on climate change and planning systems, including recent work which you may have seen with CASB and the Greenhouse Alliances in Victoria around the roles of the planning system in actually performing better in climate change. So welcome to each of you. Thanks for coming. And the session format really today was me asking you some questions, you telling us what you think, and then having a chance for questions and answers around those topics and how they fit. So I was going to start with you, Jane, with the first question, if you like, and you can elaborate from it. But I was interested in the work you've done on that position paper with Casby and other work you've done to build towards that. And I suppose you're obviously suggesting the planning system has more to do, but particularly moving from some of the adaptation sorts of issues that have dominated planning systems in the past, particularly the big risk issues of flood, fire, sea level rise and the like, to some tasks it should perform in terms of making climate resilient communities and performing roles in meeting mitigation outcomes. I'm wondering if you could sort of comment a bit on that sort of idea of the ambition in what a planning system can do, and perhaps the mismatch is what it's doing now and what you can imagine it can be doing with some short-term changes.
Sure. Well,
and maybe you might need a mic, depending on...
I'll see how it goes. I'm going to try talking without a mic, and if I'm too quiet, up the back someone can just wave at me and I'll try and use a mic, but I'm going to try and avoid using it. Thank you. Look, it's a really interesting and it's a really big topic, and a lot of the work we did for Casby and the Greenhouse Alliances was really focused on, well, we've got these ideas about what planning can do, and there's a lot of academic literature around what planning could and should do, but what's actually in our planning systems at the moment, what's actually happening on the ground, what kinds of decisions are being made through our planning system. And what we found very clearly was that the decisions on the ground weren't really reflecting the objectives. And so there was a couple of key areas that we found there was some really significant gaps, if you like, which obviously any gaps that we find are therefore also opportunities that we have to improve the way our planning system works. So really, in terms of we looked at two kind of different streams. We looked at the kind of the strategic planning that was going on and found that, in a lot of cases, there was some theoretical consideration of climate change, but it wasn't happening in a methodical way, and that's certainly an opportunity that we've got going forward. But probably most importantly, the objectives, to consider climate change and the ideas and the objectives that we have through some of our planning policy at the moment within the planning policy framework are not necessarily translating down into some specific actions that planners, and in particular statutory planners, can consider in their day-to-day assessments, and then can feel like they have the backing of the planning scheme when they're, for instance, challenged through the tribunal. So really the details were missing in the planning system, and so that was very much focused on the planning system. But we've also got large gaps where we're missing things like permit triggers for some parts of how we want to respond to climate change. So there's actually a lot of opportunities in terms of the planning system and how we plan and how we respond to climate change. In terms of the regulatory systems, the building system is often a kind of a default. Oh, that's not planning's role. That should be dealt with through the building system. We don't want to duplicate. That's actually a little bit misleading in a way, because the building system has one particular role and it does one particular thing, and that's very much based on maintaining kind of minimum standards of safety and amenity for individual buildings. But in actual fact, the planning system is much broader than that, and if you don't deal with some of these things to do with buildings at a planning scale, by the time you get to the building regulations kicking in, you've kind of lost a lot of the really key opportunities to really efficiently and effectively respond to climate change when you're talking about lot scale. So the idea that the building system somehow should be doing things rather than the planning system is not one that I subscribe to, and so I think that's one of the reasons why I think we need to take a really good hard look at what the planning system does and make sure that we've got a really clear alignment and agreement across the whole sector, state government, local governments, about what planning's doing, what building's doing, and we can make sure that they're really streamlining it.
Well, perhaps, Travis, you might be able to comment a bit on that, because of course the planning system doesn't operate alone, and the idea that what's embodied in our built form is from a household scale or a building construction scale through to neighbourhoods, and then metro-wide sort of issues about how people move, particularly in a metropolitan setting. What's your sort of sense of how well equipped industry is to deal with kind of emission targets and emission and waste outcomes and the like in the building sector, and how that can translate then to thinking at neighbourhood and precinct scale, really?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question in terms of where we're currently placed. The building regulations, so we know with new housing, if we just look at the building regulations, that somewhere in the region of 80 to 85% of new dwellings are built only to the minimum requirements, so to that 6 to 6.5 star standard, and less than 1.5% are built to a much higher performance standard. We also know that the planning scheme has a role to play there. We're just touching on making sure we're getting some of these things right to begin with, so the orientation, which can then lift and help improve some of that performance. So I think there's some things that can be done to lift that in that first instance, but in terms of the industry, what we see is they're not really well prepared for any changes. And we see that even with the ongoing discussion at the moment, where just on Friday we're meant to have an announcement around the energy provisions within the building code, and there's still no clarity on what's going to happen there, and we still see some of the key stakeholders pushing back on the requirements to move to 7-star. Now, we do have some people who are leading and doing great things. We've got Nightingale Housing here in Melbourne, we've got Cape Patterson Eco Village, we've got a whole range of examples which are showing at the individual dwelling level as well as at a larger scale what can be done. But where we're starting to fall down is going beyond the individual building. So even at Cape Patterson, they're doing really great things at an individual building level, but they're struggling to move to that broader sustainability beyond the individual building. And so some of those climate change, adaptation or resilience things that could be coming in at the kind of the precinct scale there are not necessarily coming into place. I think that community down there will be much better placed to deal with some of these things coming along. But even, there was a point last year where there's some quite significant storms went through and quite a lot of damage done to that development down there. So we need to be thinking about not only what we're doing now, but obviously into the future. And we have an industry who, the building industry, who just really want to do the minimum requirements. They don't want anything else. And we have these ongoing arguments about why we need to go and move beyond that. That's not to even kind of reflect upon the fact that we're not even delivering those minimum requirements as we are needing to. And there's research from RMIT, Melbourne Uni, CSIRO that continually shows that we're not even delivering on those things that we're meant to be delivering from a regulatory perspective. There are some people who are starting to really lead in this space, and I think that they will be well prepared for any of these changes, and they are going to differentiate their product to the rest of the market, and I think they're going to be able to lead there. But yeah, we are significantly behind here in Australia, what we're seeing in places like across Europe and across North America, or parts of North America, in relation to delivering sustainable buildings and sustainable precincts.
I might just add to that too, because I think certainly from a PIA perspective, and I think probably more broadly across a lot of people would probably be aware of this, but precincts really are one of the key opportunities that we have to really deliver some of the changes we need in a really efficient and a really effective way. And at the moment, we're not really doing that. We've got a kind of a voluntary climate response plan in our new PSP guidelines, you know, we really need to be raising the bar very, very significantly when we're at the precinct planning scale, because these are areas that we're planning now, but they're not going to be finished planning for another 5 years. They're not going to start developing. People aren't going to be living there for a number of years, and they're going to be living there in 2050, in 2100, and we're really not adequately recognising that in terms of how we're planning our precincts at the moment.
I think one of the other things as well is that we're now moving beyond looking at just the individual building for sustainability. We're thinking about the whole system. So we're thinking about the energy networks. And if you're not factoring those things into the planning and into the construction, then you're locking in a whole range of issues moving forward. We already see, these rolling blackouts or trying to control loads in people's houses already in Australia now. And that's only going to get worse as we continue to add substandard housing into the market. We already have seen, even just in recent weeks, quite a lot of research being released around how cold our housing is in Australia. And that has these wider implications, not just for the people in the housing, but for the wider energy network and the wider community as well. And so we need to be making the links between the building regulations, the planning schemes, and these wider ambitions that we have, not only in terms of climate change, but also linking to the health and well-being of people as well.
Well, Susie, perhaps you might want to talk about that, because your work suggests that people particularly in new suburbia and outer suburbia, often have distinct disadvantages around climate resilience, climate readiness, but also there's other issues of social disadvantage. What is your work telling us about certainly maladaptive developments, but also the sorts of issues that might come with mitigation policy and energy cost challenges and the like that might arise from responses that we see?
Thanks, Andrew, and it's a nice segue, Travis, that you finished on health and wellbeing, because so a lot of the work that we're doing, I guess just a little bit of context around the Centre for Just Places. It's a relatively new initiative in Jesuit Social Services, and I was 18 months ago hanging out with Travis and Andrew and various others at RMIT, feeling frustrated about everything you've just said right now, which is unfortunate that there's just a real lack of leadership really behind the systems that need to be changed. And I think the report that Jane has written, I've profusely thanked her for writing that report, because it's really, really helpful in mapping out the detailed interventions that are needed in the planning system. But what I really liked about it was the way that it mapped intersecting climate hazards and by each hazard, and looked at from the lot scale to the regional scale how planning can intervene. So it's a really, really well done report. Thanks, Jane. From my perspective and where I'm at now, the Centre for Just Places was set up because Jesuit Social Services has been focusing on issues of locational disadvantage for about 20 years. They're a social services organisation that really started working with people moving in and out of the justice system, and from there they've developed a whole range of services. Dropping Off the Edge is a set of data that we released in November last year, and that maps disadvantage by postcode across the country, and it includes 37 indicators. 30 of those, are just over 30, are social measures of disadvantage, but we've included now about 6 or 7 environmental indicators. And I guess the point to make is that there's a correlation between environmental injustices and social injustices. And so there's a particular focus of our work around looking at that intersection and really trying to address the siloed approach to dealing with inequities. So I guess to get to climate change, my particular work for about 10 years has been looking at climate change, mitigation and adaptation, and the role of local governments and communities and local level actors to sort of drive change. And so now I'm in a space where I guess what I'm seeing is that there's a whole lot of people trying to address the gaps in the fact that the systems are not really building resilient communities. In fact, what planning and the building, and I think it sort of comes through in not just the research that Travis and others have been doing for a long time, and Jane's report, is that we're actually designing vulnerability into our outer communities in particular. And I think we need to say that quite clearly. And rather than saying we need to try and enable resilience, we're actually designing vulnerability in right now. And when you look at the precinct, as Jane pointed out, that particular set of interventions that's driving growth areas, it really is driving vulnerability for the next however many years. I guess the work that we're doing, when you overlay different sets of data, we do research, action and advocacy around these issues. And when you overlay maps of disadvantage in Greater Melbourne and you put them alongside numbers of COVID deaths and housing stress and heat stress, you can see that there's a really clear spatial distribution of inequity and disadvantage going on, particularly out in the west, the southeast, and in the north, western suburbs. And so it's not going to be surprising to any of you who know Melbourne quite well that is the case. But I think it's quite stark when you see the intersecting challenges and the intersecting health and wellbeing issues that are playing out. So I guess just in terms of responding to that, one of the key things that, we hold workshops with local governments and community sector organisations, and we're mapping how they are seeing climate change impact on their clients and on themselves as service providers. And invariably, in that sort of system mapping exercise, it points to housing quality, it points to inadequate service provision, all of the things that the National Growth Areas Authority has been going on about and are advocating on right now. So I think there are voices across a whole range of sectors right now pointing to what's wrong, and I guess part of the challenge is joining up some of these voices. And I think just to finish on the point about climate change adaptation, which I've been working on in particular, there's a serious disconnect between planning and adaptation. In terms of the Victorian context, the recent budget has cut funding to adaptation, so that's not a good sign in the next coming year. We've got health sector adaptation plans, we've got built environment and infrastructure sector adaptation plans, but how they're actually playing down to the level of detail that Jane is getting to, it's just not happening. And I guess the space we're in, where we're trying to work with the community sector who are working with the most disadvantaged, it's quite clear that we have to work a lot more upstream, and that's kind of what we're getting at here with the planning system, really.
So I suppose thanks for that, Susie. I suppose to think through then sort of solutions or approaches we take, Travis, I might ask you, you talked before about the building regulatory system and the fact that it can be fragmented from neighbourhood scale, precinct scale, planning sort of issues. What do you think, what are some of the ways in which we could actually see better performance from buildings if we were to try and build in a much clearer precinct or neighbourhood scale planning process? Is it something where there's an appetite in industry then to sort of gain the benefits of that better planning, or is it something that seems to be resisted?
I think on the whole, it's probably one of those questions around the perception of environmental improvement or performance improvement of the building compared to the trade-off of how many houses you might fit on a particular piece of land. And I think that this is where the planning scheme, from my understanding, can really play a critical role in terms of that disconnect from the developer to some degree, and making sure that the land is initially planned and laid out in a way that starts off on the right foot. So we know, research that we've done here at RMIT, that the performance difference between the worst and the best orientation can be as much as 2 stars for a house, and it can be even more for an apartment, depending on the type and a whole range of other factors. But you're talking there about either being able to deliver significantly improved performance by just getting the orientation right to begin with, or being able to deliver to whatever the minimum performance is at a lower cost. And so if we make sure that we get the layout right to begin with, we can already start on the right foot with building performance. We can already start to then think about how some of those other elements of sustainability and resilience of these things play into that. We're talking about climate change, we're talking about increased number of extreme heat days, extreme cold days. our housing that we're currently providing is not fit for purpose for those weather events. And we're seeing that not just with our existing housing, but with our new housing. And so we are continuing to lock people into that poor performance. So there are things that we need to be doing there to advance that. Now, the appetite from the industry is lukewarm, I would say, to anything that they see as adding additional burdens or challenges. But we see, in a number of examples that this housing can improve quality, can improve performance. This housing sells faster. There's a market differentiation there for the people who are involved in that process. We see much better outcomes for their households. Particularly with vulnerable households that Susie was talking about, we evaluated some 9-star houses across a period of 3 years for the Department of Health and Human Services here at RMIT, who built 4 9-star houses up in Horsham. Extreme climate in summer and winter, and they were wanting to compare the performance of that housing to the 6-star housing. Now, on any number of metrics, that housing exceeded expectations. It was basically low to zero energy. This housing was built without air conditioning, and without air conditioning in a heat wave, hitting up towards 45 degrees, the housing was 10 to 15 degrees cooler than the standard housing with air conditioning. It was resilient. These people didn't have to go down and sit at the supermarket to stay cold. They could stay at home. Their health improved. There was examples of where people's health had improved so much they were able to go back into the workforce. And so the benefits there are massive. I think the problem with the building industry is that it's very much driven around the lowest cost. It's around keeping on doing the things that they know how to do, and any perception of change is threatening their business model. And I think that we need to move beyond that. And that's why I think that examples like Cape Patterson, with what Brendan Condon's doing down there, is excellent. Sure, there's probably some things that they can improve, but they've put online a dozen plans, house plans free, that are kind of 8-star plus performance. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. He takes people down there, he takes developers down through there all the time. So we need to be sharing what's working, but also what's not working, to help kind of get over this stigma that it can't be done. Because the fact of the matter is, we have the skills, we have the knowledge, we have the technology, we know how to do this construction. We see it happening elsewhere in the world, and Australia is really far behind. One of the things I would say at the moment, though, is the labour shortage and the material supply chain shortage is likely to create some tension points moving forward, and we need to kind of address that. But as part of that, we need to think about the wider benefits of this as well. So how do we get local manufacturing again to support better products in our housing system?
Sorry, Jay.
I was just going to say, one of the things with the, I guess, a reluctance you might find from the development industry, one of the things that really points to is actually how important setting a consistent baseline. If we say to everyone who's operating in the precinct planning space, this is what we expect from you. We expect everyone to be delivering a net zero, climate resilient community, and that's our baseline expectation. Now, the response to that expectation or that benchmark might be very different for different kinds of developers who have different ambitions, working in different contexts, with different authorities in the picture. But what's important is that we need that leadership to set in place and say, actually, this is the expectation that we've got, because we know that the built environment is incredibly important in terms of not just the emissions that we're saying come from the built environment, but also transport emissions, but also health emissions. So all of those different sectors all intersect in these precincts. And so if we set the bar and say this is actually what we expect, you're not saying to a developer you have to do this kind of housing or you have to do this kind of thing. We're saying we need you to get to this particular benchmark, and we expect you to get to this particular benchmark. And go off, explore. You might be innovative, you might copy what someone else has done and works and is low cost. But the important thing is that you're actually delivering that.
Yeah, and I suppose the question for you, Susie, going from both of those points, is that the cost implications of that can be borne by some communities, not others. From your advocacy work, where do you see the role of advocating for standards of particularly, not just housing, for example, but even urban greening, environments which are ready for extreme heat, for example, and the capacity for individuals but also and households but us as a community to pay or in fact not pay for those kind of climate ready environments?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a couple of interesting reports that have come out recently. The Brotherhood of St Lawrence recently released a report called Power Pain, and it's looking at who really is experiencing energy stress, and they go into the measures of energy stress. And you know, there are clear inequities. Not everyone can live in Cape Patterson, but what we'd like is for them to be able to live in houses like Cape Patterson's houses in a whole range of different places. So access to, affordable housing and efficient and resilient affordable housing is a clear advocacy call, it would join forces with the range of people calling for more public and social housing. That Brotherhood of St Lawrence report clearly points to renters as the most at risk and low-income renters in terms of energy stress. But I think in terms of other advocacy points, I guess it's part of it is having been in the world of urban planning and planning research and sort of advocacy for a long time. It's fairly it's frustrating how much we continue to hear the same calls and you know I guess one of the things that strikes me is if we're really going to put an agenda on the table about planning for climate change, we also have to put an agenda of planning for social equity and justice on the table with that. It has to be together. And there's things happening around the place. The Australian Academy of Social Science have just drafted and will be releasing soon a national just adaptation strategy. And that's really saying the same thing. It's saying when we talk about adapting our communities and cities and organisations, we need to put justice at the heart of it. And I guess that would be my big advocacy call, is that often that's missing from some of the conversations. And I guess in talking about some of the inequities right now and the evidence we have, when it comes to heat is one of the hazards that's most keenly felt and experienced and is the greatest killer of people above any other natural hazard. And we haven't got an integrated approach to dealing with heat. And we know that areas like Melton and Casey and Wyndham experience 10 degrees or more higher temperatures than non-urban areas. So we know spatially as well where heat is keenly felt. And we also know that that impacts people who are living with chronic health issues. So when you start to actually bore down into the measures, we know that climate change is impacting people and places in an inequitable way. So I guess what my advocacy point will be, and it's in the work we're doing, is that if we really are pushing the Victorian government in the next round of whoever it is that gets in, that climate justice is what planning is really driving. So that's my particular advocacy call.
Thanks, Susie. Jane, I was going to ask you, I suppose, in the work you've got for, done for CASB and other work I've seen you've done, that sense of coordination between sectors and between scales seems critical. In terms of thinking through how we'd make a planning system ready for climate challenges, what's the role of kind of bringing expertise together, and what sort of expertise can address some of those scalar and sectoral issues, do you think?
Susie mentioned a report I did, but I see that as being kind of one little small part of the picture. And I think one of the things that PIA has identified is the need to actually get together an expert advisory group to actually look in the kind of level of detail that we've done at what needs to change to actually, we have lots of policy, actually really good policy positions that we have at a state level at the moment that say we're working towards this, we're working towards that, we're working towards this. But what we actually need, if we want to see that happen on the ground, is that translated through into, well, actually, if you're looking at this type of application, you need to do this. And that it's that clarity for decision makers, whether that's a stat planner, looking at an assessment, or it's a VCAT tribunal member. You need to actually see those kind of higher level objectives go right down to a specific requirement in the planning scheme. But importantly, you also need that to be aligned with all of the other things that come into play in the development space. So that might be aligning with what the water authorities are trying to do in the kind of integrated water management space. It might be to do with what's going on in the actual building, the building regulations, making sure that we're targeting the right action and the right intervention at the right point in the process. And the level of specificity in terms of what that needs to be, I don't think's been fully explored. So I think that's one of the really critical things, is actually bringing together people from, for instance, the water industry, the building regulations, planning, and actually getting everyone together, looking at the planning scheme and looking at what the planning scheme can do. Because the planning system and the planning scheme that we have is an incredibly powerful tool. It can do a lot. The planning schemes are statutory law. They are very, very powerful, and you talk to any lawyers working in other areas, whether that's environmental law, the planning schemes are actually really, really important, and they're a really powerful tool that we're not really fully maximising at the moment. So getting a sense of actually understanding what the planning scheme can do and should do is a really, really important step. We've changed the purpose of our planning schemes recently so that responding to climate change is part of the purpose of those planning schemes, but now we need to see that flow down through into the actual requirements and regulations, and make sure that they're aligned with those building systems and the like.
Did anyone else have a comment on that? I'm going to also make sure we've got a chance for people to ask questions for the last 10 minutes or so. But
I was just going to say, wholeheartedly agree. And I guess the other thing that in the planning for climate change PIA discussion paper, there are about 2 or 3 different points around a collaborative approach to doing this work and an integrative approach. And I guess just to kind of pick up on that expert panel, absolutely experts on the system itself, but it's connecting that system to the way people live and how they live, and the fact that health and wellbeing planning is scheduled under the Climate Change Act, and it's connecting the dots within councils. One of the things that I just wanted to mention, a lot of the local governments we work with, in fact, I think most of them have all declared a climate emergency. And what that's doing is it's making council improve their integration of policy areas inside what they do. And so planners have to come to the table then with urban designers and health and wellbeing planners and community development planners. So I guess I just really emphasise that point about integration as well as collaboration. That's really important.
well, this is a chance. I've got a couple more questions, but I think it'd take the chance to open up for anyone else who has a question, and if not, I'll do mine. But I've got a microphone here, so I'll start over here, and you're going to need to speak loudly and pass that on and make sure it works. Is it working now?
I think so.
Yeah. And feel free to introduce yourself if you'd like.
Sure. My name's Cara Waters. Full disclosure, I'm a journalist at the Age, so I may quote what you say. I thought it was really interesting in what you were saying about heat being a major issue, and I was wondering how much rising sea levels are also an issue for Melbourne, or flooding, and whether that's issues that you're concerned about or looking out for planning and climate change.
I'm happy to look. Absolutely. Sea level rise it's a major issue. One of the other things that PIA has been, I guess, quite vocal about, and I would completely support, is that at the moment we don't have a clear and comprehensive picture of areas which are vulnerable to sea level rise. And it's not just areas that are vulnerable to sea level rise, but it's understanding the relationship between sea level rise, riverine flooding, what that means for the drainage systems that operate across different local government areas. And none of those things are necessarily being coordinated. And at the moment, the position is that, well, that's the responsibility of local governments. They should prepare a planning scheme amendment to implement. But the reality is that that results in a very, a slightly ad hoc approach to how we deal with flood risk, and it's not coordinated in a way that you would want it to be in order to, justify or provide an appropriate kind of basis on which to make your planning decisions. Around Port Phillip Bay, we still don't have, we know that there's areas around Port Phillip Bay that are going to be impacted by sea level rise. We don't currently have any planning overlays in place to even trigger a permit to let a planner think about what the issue is there. It ties in very closely with some of the work around vulnerability and social vulnerability and housing affordability. A lot of the time there's a big crossover between areas that are perhaps at risk and the affordability of housing, and that kind of compounds that social vulnerability that Susie's been talking to.
But can I add to that? I mean, I and you as well, Susie, have done some work with local governments outside of Melbourne who don't feel well enough resourced to really meet the expectations of contemporary flood information. They're typically relying on historical flood information, and we know that under climate change that's a more dynamic situation than just looking at the 1963 flood level or whatever it might be. And so the ability to have information that's kind of substantial evidence and evidence they can be confident in planning decision making is a challenge, particularly for smaller local governments in regional areas.
And we have a system in Victoria that's in place that deals with bushfire. I think there was an update last week, I think, to the bushfire prone areas. It's a system that I don't know the exact time, but every few years the data is reviewed based on what's happening in terms of science, and the areas that are at risk are updated, and we make our planning decisions on the basis of those risks. And we're not relying on a local council to resist pressure and have the resources and to actually get things that are really important parts of our planning system in place. So certainly that's probably a really good example of where state leadership is really, really important. That understanding where those risks are, particularly in the complexity that climate change brings to flood risk, it's really something that is probably beyond the capacity of most local governments, and also needs to be done in a coordinated way so that we're not having this council assessing flooding, taking into account their drainage system, this council not. So that idea, that's one of the fundamental things we try and achieve in planning, is making sure that there's consistency in how we plan across different areas. So there's not one set of rules for here and another set of rules for over here. And that's why that consistent framework and that consistent approach to flooding is really, I think very clearly a state matter.
Joe?
Thank you, Andrew. Joe Hurley, RMIT. Really enjoying the discussion. I'm wanting to get your thoughts on the kind of broader politics of this. I'm sensing frustration on the panel. We've had these discussions before. It's an ongoing battle, if you like. That's the way I kind of think about it. Getting these needs out in the political landscape leading up to an election. Jane, you've expressed the power of the planning system. It's not exercised in this area very much at all. Travis is talking about the frustration. Builders seem to get away with minimum standards again and again and again. And Susie, I loved your framing of designing vulnerability. So picking up on that, give me your ideas for really trying to push into that politics and advocate for, mobilise energy to change when we've seen, you know, the obdurate nature of the building sector?
I'm glad you raised politics, Joe. I mean, I don't have an easy answer to it, but I guess when you start to have people like the Actuaries Institute producing a report that's come out around housing affordability and social inequities, and one of the key asks in that is there is effective flood mapping and shared public data, but also that it starts to really, it's focusing attention on the inequities and how we're pushing costs onto people and how we're going to deal with that. I guess part of it is trying to make these issues really meaningful to people and meaningful in an everyday cost of living kind of way. And I think part of it is planning is sort of seen as a system. People who are non-planners are sort of bamboozled by it. And so I think, again, coming back to why I really like Jane's report, is I think it's making some of these issues more transparent and clear to people who don't necessarily understand the planning system. But to get to the kind of the power behind this work, I mean, one of the interesting things that I found in stepping out of the university and working in the not-for-profit sector and working with people who are about campaigning, it's having a really clear message and bringing really a powerful coalition together. That's one of the things, and there are powerful coalitions going on around issues of housing affordability and so on, and public and social housing, but this particular issue is challenging and complex, and it's trying to kind of make it meaningful. So I guess that's, without really having a PhD in political campaigning, that would be one thing, is getting the Planning Institute to become more of an activist organisation, actually.
I think from my perspective, it's making sure we're using the evidence that's available to inform the decisions. So, you know, quite a lot of my stuff is around the individual dwelling, and there's evidence that shows what the performance benefits are, the benefits in terms of the social impacts, the health and well-being, a whole range of things, which when you kind of pull them together, like how can you be arguing back saying, no, we can't move from 6-star to 7-star? And then, you know, we have a whole range of different people doing this research. We even have the regulatory impact assessment or statement. We were talking about this before. It was so conservative, and it still said to move to 7-star, yet we're still uncertain whether we're going to get that on Friday or not because of the industry power and particularly the building industry. I think it has more power than it should have in this particular emergency. We're talking about, you know, by 2050 needing to be at zero carbon or near zero carbon. We don't have decades to wait. And every building we put into the system now is another building we need to retrofit. And we need to retrofit at a ridiculous number. I don't have the number to hand, but those deep retrofits is going to be even more of a problem. And so in terms of how do we do this, I think it's regulation from the building performance perspective. I think it's making sure that there is checks and balances throughout, and we are, you know, pulling all the levers within the planning scheme that we can possibly pull, and making sure that local councils are well resourced. You know, we did just wrapping up a circular economy project looking at delivering sustainability or circular economy outcomes at the neighbourhood scale. And we heard time and time again from these developments that are trying to innovate that every time they get to council, they get a pushback because council is risk averse in some of these things. So it's, yeah, I don't know.
Oh, you get one more point? Go for it. Well, we'll move on. We've got a couple more question time. One more, and then
John Manton, no longer working in the system, there for a long time. I was interested to hear the comments on the power of the planning system to achieve results. When the objectives of planning in Victoria were incorporated into the Act in 1987, we didn't at the time recognise the issues of climate change, but those objectives, in particular sustainable development and all the bits that go with it, the statutory responsibilities of planning authorities and responsible authorities to implement the objectives, provide a very powerful system as long as it's used effectively rather than bypassed. Too often the objectives got to get pushed. away and you just look at the regs. But they really do set the basis for the system. But the planning system can't do all the heavy lifting. And in particular, when we come to dealing with the social equity, we really need to be also looking at the interaction of the planning system with the financial systems, tax. Let's not forget it. It's the tax system is such a driver of how people invest in housing and the value of housing in the economy and how that affects social equity. You go on for a long time on that. But let's try and work with these other policy arenas as well as just focusing on the planning system.
We'll take those as questions. So what have you got to, I suppose that goes to the coordination.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed.
It is, but I think you're right about the, particularly that idea of having objectives of planning that are quite well set out and quite broad in their possibilities, but seem often ignored. It's frustrating from my perspective too, just as the rest of the...
Have the objectives was radical at the time. Now,
Yeah, indeed.
Most of those...
The environmental management and the... Yeah.
Yeah, I think for most of those here, they've always been part of the landscape, but they weren't always.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess just one, you know, we've been talking about social justice and equity since the 60s. And so it's not that we don't know what's happening, and it's not that we don't understand there's uneven impacts and disadvantages being created, but I'm wondering, given the current narrative around resilience and risk, these words are now being used in so many different contexts. I think we need to appropriate them to talk about how particular structural, you know, factors like taxation and the way we're building and designing risk into populations in the future. I guess it's just trying to bring back the narrative about, you know, intergenerational inequities that are actually being designed into the system right now. I think it's just, we've lost focus on that. I want to say I want to blame neoliberalism, but that doesn't get us anywhere, but that's what it is.